The wind scraped across the Wyoming plains like a whetstone, sharpening every edge of the morning into something cold and cruel. The snow came sideways, driven by a northern gust that howled down from the bighorns, painting everything in white, but leaving nothing clean. It was the kind of day that kept even the hawks grounded, but Eleanor Whitlock had no choice but to be out in it. Wrapped in Jeremiah's old wool coat, threadbare at the elbows and still heavy with his scent, Eleanor trudged past the edge of her property line. The barren cottonwoods by the creek had long since shed their last leaves, and a thin crust of ice had begun to coat the water's edge. Her boots crunched over snow that had turned stiff as old leather. She hadn't meant to go this far, but the kindling pile was low, and she'd refused to go to town for more. Ever since the killing last spring, Rockside had turned its back on her. Not with words, they rarely used those, but with silence thick enough to choke on. Her husband's death in a cattle raid was tragedy enough. But when Eleanor had refused to join the widow's prayer circle, when she kept living alone at the homestead, rather than move into town or take up with one of the suitable bachelors who came sniffing around, the townfolk branded her strange. Her refusal to grieve the way they saw fit became its own kind of sin. That morning the world was quiet, too quiet for Eleanor's liking. She heard no coyote yips, no woodpecker tapping in the trees. The air tasted heavy, like something was waiting. Then she saw it. Not 30 feet from where she stood, the snow had been disturbed, not by a rabbit or deer. She knew those signs well, but by something heavier, human. Blood bloomed against the white in thick arterial streaks, leading off toward the ridge beyond the tree line. At the crest of a low rise, a black lump broke the smooth canvas of snow. Her heart climbed into her throat. She should have turned back, should have told herself it wasn't her business. But grief has a strange way of hollowing out fear. Eleanor walked forward. The man lay half buried in drift, face down, one arm tucked awkwardly beneath him. Snow clung to his braids, to the fringe of his hide tunic. His skin, what little of it was visible, was a deep brown, the hue of oiled earth. She crouched beside him and turned him gently. That's when she saw the wound, a bullet hole just beneath the collarbone, blood soaking his chest and steaming faintly against the snow. Lakota. She whispered a prayer without thinking, not for him, for herself, because helping him meant crossing a line the settlers had drawn in blood years ago. But she couldn't leave him. Using her shawl as a sling, she dragged him back to the cabin, her breath short, her legs trembling. Snow caught in his hair, melted against her neck. By the time she pushed open the cabin door with her shoulder and brought him inside, she was soaked through and shaking. She lay him on the floor near the stove and stoked the fire until it roared like a thing alive. For 2 days, he didn't speak. Fever took him, made his body twitch and spasm, made his breath come in fits. Eleanor boiled pine bark and willow, mashed roots with the butt of a jar. She fed him bits of broth with a spoon, wiped sweat from his brow with her last clean rag. When he moaned in pain, she sang. She sang to fill the silence. Old Appalachian hymns, the kind her mother had sung when their house in Tennessee was filled with illness. Songs of longing, of mourning. Her voice wasn't strong, but it was steady. And it was all she had to offer. The snow outside didn't stop. For days it pounded the cabin, as if the world itself wanted to bury them both. Inside, time folded in on itself. On the 3rd night, just as she was dozing in her rocking chair with a cup of cooling coffee, he stirred. His voice rasped like dry leather. Water. She knelt by him, slid a tin cup between his lips. He drank greedily, then collapsed back. "You sang," he whispered, barely audible. "I did." His eyes, dark and alert despite his pallor, watched her. "I thought it was her." "Who?" "My sister, Isang Yang. She died in the coughing sickness when I was small." Eleanor nodded, unsure what to say. "You were near gone yourself." He shifted, winced. "You should have let me die. You white woman. You help me, they'll punish you." "Let them try," she said softly. "You were bleeding to death in the snow. I ain't built to walk past that." A flicker passed through his gaze. Respect, maybe. Confusion. "Name," he said. "Eleanor." He closed his eyes. "Wichasha. What's that mean?" He didn't answer. Sleep took him again. By the end of the week, he could sit up. She gave him stew in small bowls, watched him struggle to use a spoon with his left hand. The bullet had torn through muscle, not bone, and her poultices were holding. He spoke more now, mostly in Lakota, some words in English. He told her about a scouting mission gone wrong, a skirmish near Fort Laramie. He'd been shot, crawled for miles before collapsing. She didn't ask more. She knew what settlers said about the Lakota. knew what they would say if they found out she was sheltering one in her home. But the man who sat by her fire, watching the flames with quiet dignity, wasn't the savage they spoke of. He was proud, broken, but proud. And then, one night, it happened. She was singing again, an old ballad, half remembered from her girlhood, the kind that made her think of spring rain and broken promises. He closed his eyes as she sang, breathing slow and deep, and outside, past the frost-covered window, two figures crouched low against the storm. Lakota scouts. They'd been tracking their lost comrade for days. They saw the fire, heard the song, and they did not shoot, did not burst through the door. They listened, then vanished into the snow. Eleanor felt the shift in the air the next morning, as if something had changed. Wicasa sat straighter, his eyes more focused. "They know," he said. "My people, they came." Her heart thudded. "What will they do?" He looked at her long and hard, then said quietly, "They will not forget your voice." She didn't understand. Not yet, but she would. The snow melted slower that year. By mid-March, the drifts still clung stubbornly to the gullies and the north faces of the hills. Mud pooled at the base of the trees, thick as molasses, and the creek swelled with runoff, churning brown and violent. With spring's arrival came movement. Elk along the ridgelines, hawks wheeling in the sky, and people talking again. And in Rockside, talk was the one thing no thaw could slow. Eleanor Whitlock hadn't meant to ride into town, but she was out of salt, and her only tin of lamp oil had cracked in the freeze. The roads were half-frozen ruts, the kind that pulled at wagon wheels and broke axles, so she came on horseback, her mare Juniper moving slow, careful-footed. She wore her widow's shawl despite the warming air, a gesture more of habit than need. The townsfolk still offered nods when they couldn't avoid her, but no one stepped too close. She didn't expect them to, not after what she'd done. Rumors had moved faster than snowmelt. Someone had seen smoke from her chimney during the blizzard, when every other cabin for miles was dark. Someone else swore they saw tracks, bare feet, too wide to be white, leading away from her land after the storm. And then the miller boy, out trapping rabbits, claimed he found a shredded strip of hide tunic near her fence line. "Indian make," he said. No mistaking it. None of them knew for sure, but certainty wasn't needed in Rockside. A whisper was as good as proof. As she tied up Juniper outside Hammond's general store, she felt the weight of eyes on her. Men in boots too clean for workdays stood silent at the saloon door. A cluster of women by the smithy leaned together, mouths pursed tight. Only old Elias, the drunk who'd buried half his family to fever and the bottle, raised a hand in vague greeting. She pushed into Hammond's with her list and her coin, ready to do her business in silence. But silence refused to return the favor. "Didn't expect to see you back, Mrs. Whitlock," said Martha Hammond, her voice sharp as a cracked bell. "Running low on salt," Eleanor replied evenly, setting her coin on the counter. "You could have sent someone, might be safer, for everyone." Eleanor met her gaze. "I ain't hiding." A moment passed. Martha looked away first, muttering something under her breath as she filled the order. Her hands shook more than usual. Behind her, two more customers entered. A pair of men, ranch hands from the Carson spread. They froze when they saw Eleanor, then moved to the back wall, pretending interest in nails and rope. She could feel the heat of their suspicion behind her. As she stepped outside with her sack, Sheriff Nate Rudd approached from across the street. He was a tall man, built like a pine, broad, straight-backed, always watching. His hat sat low over his brow, shadowing eyes that didn't miss much. "Eleanor, Sheriff, town's uneasy. Can't say I blame 'em. You gonna ask Nate or just accuse?" He sighed. "Did you harbor an Indian during the blizzard?" She looked up at him, calm as creek water. "I found a man dying in the snow. Didn't ask his tribe before I stopped him from bleeding out. And when he was better? He walked, didn't say where, not my business." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You know what the Carson boys'll say if they think he's still out there. They lost 2 head of cattle in that same storm. Found the carcasses with arrows in 'em. You think he did it? I think people are looking for someone to blame, and you're easier than a ghost in the trees." She mounted Juniper slowly. Let 'em look. But even as she turned her mare back toward the homestead, Eleanor felt it, the weight of tension gathering like storm clouds behind her. It wasn't just whispers anymore. The town wanted justice, or vengeance, and the line between them was thin as barbed wire. That night, Eleanor sat by her fire, sharpening her old kitchen knife not for use, but because it steadied her hands. She hadn't seen Wicasa in 2 weeks. After his strength returned, He'd vanished into the trees without farewell or thanks, just a single carved bead left on her table, smoothed with soot and bearing a bird etched in black lines. She wasn't sure if it was a token or a warning. Then came the knock, not a pounding, a single, deliberate knock. She rose, knife still in hand, and cracked the door open. There on the threshold stood a young Lakota girl, no more than 10, dressed in deerskin, her black braid tied with red cord. Behind her, 3 more figures emerged from the trees. Women, older, their faces weathered but calm. The youngest one held something wrapped in buffalo hide. She stepped forward, hands outstretched. "For the song," the girl said. Eleanor took the bundle. Inside was a small ceremonial pipe, carved of red pipestone, its stem adorned with owl feathers and tiny beads. It was not a gift lightly given. It meant kinship. It meant trust. She looked up at them, her voice caught in her throat. One of the elder women stepped forward, speaking in Lakota. The girl translated. "You sang him back. You reminded him of who he was. We call you Wiching Chalawiyaka now, sister who sings." The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The air smelled of pine smoke and thawing earth. Eleanor didn't cry, but she held the pipe with both hands as if it weighed more than bone or stone, like it held a future she hadn't asked for but could no longer walk away from. Down in Rockside, 2 men gathered behind the livery, their voices low. "She's one of them now," one hissed. "Taking gifts, protecting murderers. Carson says we ride out tomorrow. No badge, no trials, just fire." The other spat into the dirt. "Damn right. We burn that house to ash." The morning sky burned orange over the grasslands, casting long, jagged shadows from the cottonwoods that lined the edge of Eleanor Whitlock's property. The wind was restless again, tugging at the bare branches, moaning across the roof like a wounded thing. Eleanor rose before the sun, as always, to tend the stove, fill the water basin, and boil chicory. But that morning, something was off. Birds didn't sing. No crows cawed. Even Juniper, her mare, stamped nervously in the lean-to, ears twitching to a sound Eleanor couldn't yet hear. She felt it in her bones first. Something coming. Not just a man, not just trouble. A change. The night before, after the Lakota women had returned to the hills, Eleanor sat with the pipe across her lap for hours. It rested with a strange gravity, both artifact and promise. She didn't smoke it, didn't know the ceremony, the meaning, but she understood the gesture. They had named her Wiching Chalawiyaka, sister who sings, and in doing so they had claimed her, or maybe she had claimed them. The distinction didn't matter. The choice was made. By mid-morning, Eleanor had begun loading her rifle, not for defense but preparation. If something was coming, and she could feel it was, it would not be talked down with kind words. She was inside slicing venison when the shot rang out. The glass bottle on her windowsill shattered. She ducked low, instinct screaming, heart pounding like war drums. A second shot punched into the doorframe. Splinters rained across the floor. She grabbed the rifle and crawled toward the back wall, peeking through a knothole. 3 riders. Dust kicked up behind them as they galloped in from the west, faces half covered with scarves, rifles slung across saddles. She recognized one even from a distance. Tanner Carson, oldest of the Carson boys. Broad-shouldered and born with a mean streak longer than the Green River, his brother Harlan was just behind him. The third she couldn't make out, but they all wore the same expression, purpose sharpened by hate. Eleanor's cabin was too far from town for help to come, and no one in Rockside would lift a finger anyway. She was alone. She dropped to her knees beside the window, lifted her rifle, and waited. Another shot hit the porch beam. Then silence. She heard them dismount. Heard boots crunching snow and gravel. Heard one of them laugh low and ugly. "Whitlock," Tanner called. "Come on out. We're just here to ask you a few questions." She didn't answer. "We know he was here. We know you took him in. That makes you a traitor, girl. Don't matter if you're pretty or sad or holy with your hymns, you helped to kill her. That makes you one." Eleanor's hands didn't shake. Her breathing slowed. "We'll give you a minute," Harlan added. "Then we torch the place." They were 10 feet from her door now. She fired. The window glass exploded as the bullet caught the edge of Tanner's boot, throwing him backward into the snow. He screamed, dropped his rifle. Harlan ducked behind the rain barrel. "God damn! She's got a shooter." "Of course she does," Tanner roared. "She's a savage lover." Another shot, this one from Harlan, punched into the wall inches from her shoulder. She rolled aside, reloaded quickly, and then drums. Not loud, not thunderous, but steady, echoing faintly from the ridgeline beyond her pasture. The riders heard it too. "What the hell is that?" the third man barked. A shape moved in the trees, then another, then many. Lakota warriors emerged from the pines, bows drawn, rifles shouldered, their painted faces silent and unreadable. More than a dozen. They did not shout. They didn't need to. One of them stepped forward, tall, wrapped in a winter robe of bison hide, his eyes locked on Eleanor's cabin, on the smoke curling from its stovepipe. "Wicasa." His voice carried low and clear across the frozen pasture. "You come to hurt the singer." The Carson boys turned, panic on their faces now. "She saved my life," Wicasa said, "and you would burn her for it. You speak of justice. This is not justice." The third rider bolted first, kicking his horse and galloping toward the tree line. An arrow found his back before he cleared 20 yards. He toppled sideways and didn't rise. Tanner screamed again, this time not in pain but fear. He grabbed his brother, dragged him backward toward the horses. "We didn't mean to shoot. We just wanted answers." The Lakota didn't move, didn't shoot. Wicasa raised a hand and the bows lowered. "You have your answer," he said. Tanner scrambled onto his horse, blood soaking through his boot, and rode. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, rifle in hand. Wicasa walked forward alone. "You were right," he said. "They came." She nodded, silent. "You are not safe now. Not with them. Not alone." "I've never been safe," she replied. "But I've never felt less alone either." He studied her, then reached inside his robe and pulled out a second pipe, simpler, plainer. He placed it at her feet. "You carry 2 names now," he said. "The one your people gave you and the one we did. You must decide which to keep." Then he turned and walked away, vanishing into the snow and silence of the pines. That night, Eleanor buried the spent shells beside the porch, wiped the blood from her floorboards and laid both pipes side by side on her mantel. She stared at them long into the dark. The ashes from the stove curled upward like ghosts, and Eleanor watched them rise through the smoke hole as if trying to follow them somewhere beyond. Morning had broken red again, not the soft pink of a spring dawn, but a fierce, burning crimson that reminded her of the blood frozen into her porch. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just closed her eyes long enough to forget where she was, only to be pulled back by every creak of the walls, every shift of the wind. The 2 pipes remained on her mantel, side by side like bookends of a story not yet finished, one carved with delicate Lakota etchings, graceful lines that spoke of kinship, of ceremony, of breath shared in peace. The other, her husband Jeremiah's, a corncob pipe scorched from years of use, its bowl blackened with sorrow. She had buried Jeremiah beneath the cottonwoods last spring. That had cost her everything she knew of love. But now, standing at the edge of 2 worlds, one that mourned him and another that had named her sister, Eleanor began to understand that grief was not a single loss, but many. Rockside did not speak to her anymore. After the fire, the sheriff hadn't come. Neither had the doctor, nor the blacksmith, whose plowshare she'd once mended in trade. Only Elias, drunk and stumbling, had passed by the edge of her property, tipping his hat and muttering, "Don't let 'em break ya, Ellie." Then he vanished into the hills like a ghost. She hadn't seen the Carson boys since that day either. Rumors circled like buzzards. Some said Harlan had lost his nerve and gone east to Cheyenne. Others claimed Tanner had taken up with bounty men out of Laramie, hunting not outlaws, but sympathizers. A new word, cold and sharp. That spring, Eleanor planted again. Corn, beans, a small patch of wildflowers near the creek where she first found Wicasa dying. She worked harder than before, not because she needed food, but because labor dulled the ache in her chest. Then came the boy. He was maybe 12, scrawny and starved, with hands too big for his sleeves, rode up on a mule with a limp and a cloth tied around his wrist where a bullet had grazed him. He said his name was Asa. Said he'd come from a mining camp north of Powder River. Said men there were talking about a white squaw who harbored heathens and kept a war party in her barn. "I didn't know where else to go," he told her, eyes darting around the yard. "They're coming." Eleanor didn't ask how he knew. She just boiled water, dressed his wound, and made room in the barn. The next night, 3 Lakota women returned, 2 of them the same who had delivered the pipe. The third, older, carried a bundle wrapped in rabbit fur. Inside was a newborn. "She is alone," the eldest said in broken English. "Her mother was taken. Her father is gone. You have a warm fire." Eleanor held the child, barely heavier than a loaf of bread. her skin dark and smooth, her breath shallow but steady. The baby opened her eyes briefly, then closed them again, trusting. She could have said no, could have reminded them that she was barely surviving herself, that a white woman raising a Lakota child would be seen not just as strange, but dangerous. Instead, she whispered softly, "I lost a child once." The eldest nodded, placed a hand on her shoulder. No words, just wait. Within a week, Eleanor's cabin became more than a home. It became a crossing place. Asa helped tend the garden and started calling her Miss L. The baby, whom Eleanor named Bluebird after the wildflowers blooming near the creek, slept swaddled in her arms or on her chest. And sometimes, when the wind rose high enough, Eleanor would sing again, the same soft hymns from her girlhood, or the lullaby her mother had used when cholera took her little brother, and Wicasa returned. He came quietly, standing by the tree line like he'd never left. He looked thinner, worn by something not physical. "They whisper of bounty now," he said, "of a woman who saved the wrong life." "Let them whisper," Eleanor replied. "I've got beans to plant." He gave a faint smile, but his eyes held something darker. "They are forming a band, Carson's sons, ranchers from Red Oak. They call it justice, but it smells of revenge." She straightened. "And the Lakota? They say it is not your war, that you are Wyaka sister but not warrior." She looked out toward the hills, toward the ridge where the sun was slipping down like a tired rider. "Then I'll do what sisters do. I'll hold the line until they're ready." Wicasa placed his hand on hers. "You will lose everything." "I already did," she whispered. "Now I just want something to live for." He stepped back. "Then you are one of us, not by blood, by fire." On the morning of June the 2nd, a plume of smoke rose on the horizon, dark and heavy. Asa saw it first. "They're burning a homestead down south." Eleanor strapped Bluebird to her chest, loaded the rifle, and walked out to the field. She turned slowly, scanning the horizon. "They'll be here by nightfall," Wicasa said, stepping out of the trees again. "Carson has 10 men, maybe more. And you?" "I will bring 10 hearts. Then we meet in the middle." And when the sun dipped low and the land turned gold with the dying light, Eleanor stood at the edge of her garden, rifle in hand, baby against her chest, and watched as shadows rode in from the west, hate in their mouths and fire in their saddlebags. Behind her, from the pines, came the soft rustle of feathers, of bows drawn, of warriors silent as dusk. They would not call it a war, but what happened that night would echo longer than any treaty. Nightfall came slow and sullen over the prairie, like the last breath of a dying man. The grass shimmered gold under the fading sun, and somewhere in the distance a lone coyote cried. At the edge of her homestead, Eleanor Whitlock stood tall, rifle braced, her body half-shadowed in the fading light, her daughter Bluebird wrapped snug against her chest. Behind her, a line of Lakota warriors waited among the pines, bows strung, rifles loaded, their faces painted with symbols of warning and remembrance. From the west, the riders came. A dozen, maybe more, men from Red Oak and Rockside, dust-thick and hard-eyed. Carson rode at the front, his wounded boot wrapped in burlap, fury riding in his bones. The others followed close behind, carrying torches, rope, and steel. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their presence screamed everything. Eleanor raised her voice first. "You don't have to do this." Carson pulled his horse to a stop just shy of her fence line. "You made your choice, Whitlock. Now we're making ours." "You come with fire, but all you'll do is make ash." "She's got a baby with her," one of the men muttered. "You sure about this, Tanner? She ain't no mother. That's an Indian brat." The insult struck the air like a hammer. Eleanor didn't flinch. She shifted Bluebird gently, then lifted her rifle and cocked it. "You come any closer," she said. "I won't wait for a shot." Tension stretched across the space between them like a rawhide strip, thin, taut, and ready to snap. And then the pines moved. Wicasa stepped out first, flanked by others. Young men with steady eyes, old men with scars that told stories longer than any sermon. They didn't shout. They didn't raise weapons. They stood. The riders faltered. Eleanor's voice rang again, clear as a chapel bell. "This land's seen too much blood. I won't let you spill more just 'cause you're scared. You brought this on yourself," Carson hissed. "You laid with them, raised one of theirs. You picked a side." She leveled her rifle. "I picked people. That used to mean something." And in the stillness that followed, something shifted. One rider turned his horse, then another, until only Carson remained. "You think this ends here?" he growled. "You think they'll let you raise that baby in peace? You're a symbol now. And men kill symbols." Eleanor stepped forward, crossing the invisible line between her yard and theirs. "If you come back," she said, voice low but unshaking, "bring enough men to bury." For a moment, Carson looked ready to charge her himself, but then he saw Wicasa move behind her, saw the quiet readiness in the eyes of those who stood with her. He turned and rode. In the weeks that followed, word spread faster than fire, not of a battle but of a woman who had faced down death with a child in her arms and a nation at her back. Some called her a traitor, others whispered her name with awe, but none forgot it. Sheriff Rudd came once, alone, hat in hand. He stood awkwardly on her porch. "I can't protect you," he said. "Not if this gets bigger." Eleanor only nodded. "Wasn't expecting you to." He hesitated, then added, "You want to live like them? Raise that child with their ways? That's your call. But the town won't forget." She smiled sadly. "I hope they don't." Bluebird grew under the prairie sun. As the years passed, she walked both worlds. Eleanor taught her English hymns and the names of flowers, while Wicasa returned often, bringing stories, songs, and Lakota names for the stars. The two pipes remained on the mantel, never smoked, never moved, one white, one red, the hearth between them. In time, other women came, widows, runaways, cast-offs, women who'd seen through the lie that the frontier belonged to one kind of person. They brought seeds, they brought stories, they brought the will to live free. The cabin became more than a refuge. It became a school, a garden. A fire kept lit through the long Wyoming winters, a place where no one asked which blood ran through your veins, only whether you'd stand beside another when the cold came. Years later, when Eleanor passed, they buried her beneath the cottonwoods next to Jeremiah, under a stone carved in both English and Lakota. She sang life into the dying and called strangers family, sister to the flame, mother to peace. And Bluebird, grown and fierce, took up the pipes, one in each hand. She carried them forward into a world her mother had dared to change with nothing but a song.